Catherine Mercer had spent her entire life working towards one goal: to take over the prestigious law firm her father had built from the ground up. But when the moment came to ask for what she had earned, she was met with a cold, cutting betrayal. Her father handed the reins to her younger brother, a decision that would fracture their family and set her on a path that would test her limits. What happens when a woman who has sacrificed everything for her family is forced to choose between loyalty and the pursuit of her dreams? Catherine's journey to the top of the legal world will push her to the brink, testing not only her intellect but her resolve to redefine her place in a world dominated by men. In a courtroom where every word could break her, Catherine must confront her past, face off against the one person who should have believed in her, and fight for the success she deserves. But winning isn't everything, especially when the person you're fighting against is the one who raised you. Catherine Mercer sat across from her father in his grand mahogany-paneled office, the walls adorned with prestigious degrees and accolades. At 28, she had earned her law degree from Harvard, worked tirelessly at Mercer and Associates, and was now more than ready to take over the firm's operations. But when she had finally gathered the courage to ask her father about her future, the answer had been a blow to her pride. "I've decided to pass the reins to Grant," Henry Mercer had said coolly, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. "He'll take over as the new head of the firm." Grant, her younger brother, had just returned from a forgettable year at law school and lacked both the experience and expertise Catherine had developed over the past 6 years. But in her father's eyes, he was the heir apparent. Catherine's heart sank. "Father, I've worked for this company since I was 22. I've put in more hours than anyone else, and my credentials are far superior to Grant's." Catherine's voice cracked with frustration. Her mother, Margaret Mercer, who had been quietly watching from the corner of the room, didn't say anything. She merely nodded at Catherine, silently conveying her support, yet also her resignation to the family's patriarchal structure. "Your brother has potential, Catherine," her father continued, his voice a sharp contrast to her emotional outburst. "He'll find his way. You need to learn your place." Catherine's fists clenched, her fingers digging into her palms. It wasn't just the dismissal of her professional capabilities that stung. It was the implied assumption that, as a woman, her place was not at the helm of the family business. Catherine could feel the weight of generations of Mercer men holding her back. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. "This is the last time you'll tell me where my place is, Father." Without another word, she turned and walked out of the office, leaving the family estate behind. The cold air of the night wrapped around her as she entered her car, the sound of the engine humdrum and distant, much like her father's voice in her ears. Catherine's decision to leave her family's law firm was not an easy one, but as she packed her belongings into her small apartment in downtown Dallas, she felt a strange sense of liberation. Her mother had tried to convince her to stay, but Catherine knew that she had to prove her worth on her terms, away from the shadows of the Mercer name. Within weeks, she secured a position at one of Dallas's most prestigious firms, Harrison and Hayes. The firm's partner, Richard Hayes, was a seasoned lawyer with an eye for talent, and he immediately saw Catherine's potential. It didn't take long for her to make a name for herself. She was sharp, articulate, and driven, traits that set her apart from her colleagues, who often overlooked her in favor of the more established, older male lawyers. But Richard saw through that, and within a few months, Catherine was leading several high-profile cases. She found herself working late nights, often at the firm's expansive conference table, drafting briefs and strategizing for upcoming trials. The firm was different from Mercer and Associates, with a more collaborative atmosphere where merit was acknowledged. It felt like a breath of fresh air, but Catherine couldn't escape the thoughts of her family. There were days when she longed to hear her mother's voice, to share the success she was building. But every time she picked up the phone to call her, her courage faltered. The emotional gulf between them seemed too wide to bridge, and she couldn't bring herself to face the disappointment in her mother's eyes. She was carving her path, but it was a lonely one. Still, she found solace in her work. One particular case stood out, a civil rights case involving a wrongful death that had received little attention in the media. Catherine took on the case with fervor, dedicating her time and expertise to ensuring justice for the deceased family. She won the case after months of hard-fought litigation, a victory that not only brought her respect in the firm, but also cemented her standing as a capable and driven lawyer. As Catherine's career flourished, her personal life remained distant. She had distanced herself from her family, but her father's name still haunted her. It was impossible to escape the connection to Mercer and Associates, especially when a high-profile client came to her firm with a lawsuit that would forever change her relationship with her father. The client, an ambitious real estate developer, was suing Mercer and Associates for negligence after a faulty contract had led to the collapse of a major project. Catherine immediately recognized the name of the firm, and her heart skipped a beat when she realized who she would be up against. Her father. This case, personal and professional, was everything Catherine had been working for. It was her chance to prove herself not just as a lawyer, but as someone who could stand on her own without the influence of the Mercer name. The stakes were higher than ever. The trial was long and grueling, with Henry Mercer himself representing the firm. As father and daughter faced each other in the courtroom, Catherine felt a cold resolve settle within her. There was no room for sentiment here, only the pursuit of justice. Her father's smug attitude in the courtroom only fueled her determination to win. "Your client didn't understand the terms of the contract, Miss Mercer," Henry argued confidently. "It was their own mistake, and they should bear the responsibility." But Catherine's cross-examination of key witnesses revealed cracks in Mercer and Associates' defense. Piece by piece, she built her case, exposing negligence, miscommunication, and dishonesty in her father's firm. She was relentless, cutting through the layers of legal jargon and exposing the truth beneath. The jury sided with her client, awarding them a settlement that not only ruined Mercer and Associates' reputation, but also sent a clear message that Catherine was a force to be reckoned with. She had won, but the victory left a bitter taste in her mouth. It was not the kind of win she had hoped for, and her father's icy silence in the courtroom only reinforced the emotional gulf between them. After the trial, Catherine's colleagues at Harrison and Hayes celebrated her victory, but the satisfaction of her success was short-lived. She had expected some kind of acknowledgement from her family, but Henry Mercer refused to speak to her. Even Grant, who had once been her closest ally, remained silent. Catherine reflected on the years she had spent trying to earn her father's approval, only to find herself more distant from him than ever. She had fought tooth and nail for her place in the legal world, but the Mercer name would never fully leave her. As she sat in her office that night, reviewing the trial documents, her phone rang. It was her mother. "I'm proud of you, Catherine," Margaret said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "But your father, he won't ever admit it." Catherine's eyes blurred with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "I know, Mom, but I don't need his approval anymore. I've earned my place on my own." Several months later, Catherine was seated at her desk when her assistant knocked and announced that her father was in the lobby, requesting a meeting. Her heart raced. What could he possibly want? Henry Mercer, looking older and more frail than before, stood in her office doorway, his presence commanding as ever, but there was no hint of the arrogance he once carried. "May I speak with you, Catherine?" he asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Catherine stood and gestured for him to take a seat. "What is this about, Father?" "I was wrong," he said bluntly. "Grant isn't ready to take over Mercer and Associates. I've realized that you were always the right one for the job. I'd like to offer you the position of managing the firm. You've earned it." Catherine's mind raced. She had finally proved herself in the legal world, but the idea of returning to Mercer and Associates after everything that had transpired felt like a step backward. Yet, she couldn't deny the weight of her father's words. "I appreciate your offer," she said, her voice steady. "But I've built something for myself here, and I'm not sure I can return to that life." Her father's expression hardened, but there was a hint of regret in his eyes. "I understand, Catherine, but know that you always have a place at Mercer and Associates." As Catherine watched her father leave, she realized that the choice was hers. She had carved out a life for herself on her terms, but the door to her family's legacy was still open.